We found a tree with dozens of watches nailed to it, all ticking in sync. At first the sound was so faint we mistook it for insects. Tick, tick, tick. The forest had been silent for hours, the kind of silence that makes your ears strain for anything human. Wind, water, distant birds. Instead there was only that dry, mechanical rhythm drifting through the trees like a pulse. Jonah heard it before I did. "Wait," he said quietly. We stopped on the narrow deer path. The air was cold and damp enough to sting the back of my throat. The canopy above us was so thick the late afternoon light had already turned gray. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. At first I thought it was raindrops hitting leaves. Then the ticks aligned. Hundreds of them, perfectly synchronized. We followed the sound deeper into the woods. The forest here was ancient. The trunks were thick and twisted. Bark split into deep black seams like scars. Moss swallowed fallen logs whole. Nothing grew straight. Everything leaned or curled, as if the ground beneath had shifted many times and the trees had simply adapted. Even the air felt older. The path ended at a clearing we hadn't seen on the map. That was where the tree stood. It was enormous, easily 5 feet across at the base. Its bark was gray and swollen with knots. Nails covered the trunk from chest height upward. Each nail held a watch. Old watches, cheap watches, rusted pocket watches, digital ones with cracked plastic faces, leather bands, metal bands, broken straps dangling. Dozens of them, maybe 100, and every single one was ticking in perfect unison. Tick, tick, tick. The sound filled the clearing like rain on tin. Jonah stepped closer first. What the hell? The watches were set to different times. I could see that immediately. Some showed early morning, some late evening. A few had stopped at odd minutes past midnight. But they all ticked together. Exactly together. I rubbed my arms. The temperature had dropped sharply inside the clearing, as if the air here didn't belong to the rest of the forest. "Someone put these here," I said. Jonah crouched near the trunk, studying the nails. "They're old," he said. "Some of these look decades old." One of the watches near eye level twitched slightly. Not the hands, the entire watch, as if something behind the bark had shifted. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed louder now, closer to our ears. "Maybe it's some kind of memorial," I said. "For what?" I didn't answer. Jonah reached toward one of the watches, a cheap silver one with a cracked face. "Don't," I said. He paused. The forest behind us had gone unnaturally still. No wind, no birds. Even the insects had stopped. Tick, tick, tick. "Feels like they're counting something," Jonah said. "Counting what?" He shrugged and touched the watch. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the ticking stopped. Every watch on the tree froze. The silence hit like pressure in my ears. Jonah pulled his hand back quickly. "Okay. That's not normal." We waited. For a few seconds nothing happened. Then, tick, the watches started again. But not together. One ticked, then another, like dominoes falling through time. Within seconds the rhythm had returned to perfect synchronization. Tick, tick, tick. Jonah stepped back. "Did you feel that?" he asked. "What?" "Like something noticed." I didn't want to agree, but I had felt it too. A shift. The same subtle awareness you feel when someone behind you begins watching. The forest seemed to lean closer around the clearing. We decided to leave. That should have been simple. But when we turned around, the path we had entered from was gone. Not hidden. Gone. The trees had closed the space where it had been. Jonah frowned. "No way." We circled the clearing once. Then twice. Every direction led to dense, tangled woods we didn't recognize. The ticking followed us everywhere. It wasn't getting quieter. If anything, it was getting louder, like we were standing inside a clock. "Maybe we just missed it," I said. Jonah shook his head slowly. His eyes were fixed on the tree. "Look." Several watches had changed. I hadn't noticed at first, but the hands were moving much faster now. Not spinning, advancing, minutes passing every few seconds. Yet the ticking stayed slow, steady. Tick, tick, tick. Okay, Jonah said quietly. That's wrong. One watch suddenly snapped forward an entire hour. Another skipped backwards 10 minutes. The hands kept shifting, like time was sliding loose inside them. Maybe they're broken, I said, though it sounded stupid even as I spoke. Jonah pointed to one watch near the center of the trunk. The glass was fogged, but I could still see the time. 3:17. My stomach tightened. I checked my phone. 3:17. Tick. The watch jumped. 3:18. My phone changed at the same moment. Jonah slowly lifted his wrist. His watch read the same. 3:18. Tick. 3:19. The forest exhaled. Leaves rustled high above us even though no wind touched the ground. Then something moved between the trees. Not an animal. The movement was wrong. Branches bent slightly as if something tall passed behind them, but nothing visible crossed the gaps. Tick, tick, tick. Do you see that? Jonah whispered. I nodded. The movement circled the clearing. Slow, patient. Every time a watch ticked forward, the unseen presence shifted closer. The watches weren't keeping time. They were measuring something. Measuring us. Another watch jumped forward 3 minutes. The ticking quickened. Tick, tick, tick. The shadows under the trees deepened. I began noticing shapes that weren't there a second before. Tall outlines between trunks. Too narrow, too still. Jonah stepped closer to me. Those weren't there earlier. No. The shapes leaned, watching. Every tick pulled them nearer to the clearing's edge. One of the watches suddenly stopped. The second hand froze. Instantly, one of the shapes in the trees vanished. Another watch stopped. Another shape disappeared. I stared at the tree. Jonah! He followed my gaze. Some watches were still ticking. Others had stopped. Each stopped watch meant one less shape in the forest. But the ones that remained had moved closer. Much closer. They're counting, Jonah whispered. Counting what? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward the trunk again. Jonah, don't. But he was already reaching up. What if we stop them? He said. His fingers wrapped around a digital watch nailed to the bark. The ticking paused again. All of it. Total silence. The shapes froze in the trees. Jonah yanked the watch free. The nail squealed as it came out. The moment the watch left the trunk, the forest inhaled. Every remaining watch began ticking wildly. Tick, 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 tick. The hands spun. Minutes, hours, days racing forward. The shadows lunged. Jonah dropped the watch. The moment it hit the ground, everything stopped. The spinning hands froze. The shadows retreated slightly. But something had changed. The watches slowly began ticking again. Not dozens of them. 2. Just 2. I looked at the tree. Only 2 watches were still moving. One showed Jonah's face in the reflection. The other showed mine. Tick. Jonah swallowed. Those weren't ours. Tick. The unseen shapes in the forest began moving again. Closer with every sound. Tick. I checked my phone. The time was gone. The screen only showed a timer. 37 seconds. Tick. Jonah's watch showed the same countdown. 36 seconds. Tick. The forest leaned inward. Branches creaked. Something enormous shifted beyond the clearing. Tick. 35 seconds. Jonah whispered. What happens when it hits 0? The watches nailed to the tree, all the ones that had stopped, began slowly resetting. Hands turning backward. Hours rewinding. Days reversing. Like the forest was preparing the clocks again. For the next 2. Tick. 34 seconds. I realized something then. Those watches hadn't been decoration. They were records. Every watch belonged to someone who had come here before. Someone who had run out of time. Tick. 33 seconds. Behind us, deep in the woods, something enormous began walking toward the clearing. Slow. Certain. Tick. Something kept snapping branches high above us, moving in a perfect circle. At first we thought it was wind. The forest had been quiet all morning, the kind of quiet that settles deep into your chest when you're too far from roads, too far from people. The trail behind us had long since faded into nothing but animal paths and instinct. Still, the canopy overhead stirred. Crack. A branch broke somewhere above the treetops. Caleb stopped walking. His pack straps creaked as he shifted his weight. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. We both looked up. The canopy was thick. Ancient hemlock and spruce woven together so tightly that sunlight only slipped through in narrow blades. Dust floated in the beams like suspended ash. Nothing moved. Then, crack, another branch snapped. But this one sounded farther to the left. Caleb frowned. "Weird direction for wind." "There's no wind," I said. He tilted his head slightly, listening. For a moment the forest returned to stillness. No birds. No insects. Even the distant rustle of leaves had stopped. Then the sound came again. Crack. Directly behind us. Caleb turned slowly in a full circle. "You see anything?" "No." But something about the pattern of the sounds bothered me. The direction kept changing, but the distance didn't. Each break came from somewhere high in the canopy, far above where we could see clearly. Crack. This time to the right. Caleb let out a quiet breath. "Okay. That's strange." The snapping continued. Crack. Pause. Crack. Pause. Each time it shifted slightly around us. Not random. Deliberate. We kept walking. The deeper we went into the forest, the older the trees became. Some trunks were wider than cars, their bark dark and ridged like old stone. Moss coated everything. Branches, fallen logs, even the roots twisting out of the ground. The air had grown colder too. I could see faint vapor each time we exhaled. Crack. The sound came again above us. Caleb stopped. "Hold on." He pulled a compass from his jacket pocket and looked down at it, then slowly turned. Another crack echoed overhead. He turned again, following the direction. Then he looked up at the canopy and frowned. "It's moving," he said. "Obviously." "No," he said quietly. "I mean moving around us." I felt a slow tension creep into my stomach. Crack. The sound came from ahead of us now. Caleb rotated the compass again, watching carefully. Another snap, this time from our left. He swallowed. "It's making a circle." I stared at him. "What?" "A perfect circle," he said. "Listen." We stood still. For a moment nothing happened. Then, crack, behind us. 3 seconds later, crack, left. 3 seconds again, crack, ahead. Then, crack, right. The rhythm repeated. Exactly the same interval. Exactly the same spacing. Around us, like something enormous was moving through the treetops in a perfect ring. My skin prickled. "That's not possible," I said. Caleb shook his head slowly. "Nothing moves like that." We started walking faster. The snapping followed. Crack. Behind us. Crack. Left. Crack. Ahead. Crack. Right. Always above the canopy, always just out of sight. The deeper we walked, the darker the forest grew. The canopy tightened until the sunlight thinned into dull green haze. Crack. Caleb suddenly stopped again. "What?" I asked. He held up a hand. "Listen carefully." The snapping had changed. The rhythm was still precise, still circling, but the pauses between each break had shortened. Crack. 2 seconds. Crack. 2 seconds. Crack. 2 seconds. "It's getting smaller," Caleb whispered. "What is?" "The circle." I looked up again, but the branches were too dense to see through. The forest ceiling seemed impossibly high now, the treetops disappearing into a gray lattice of needles and shadow. Crack. Closer. The sound was louder now too, with splitting sharply. Something cold brushed down my spine. "It's closing in," I said. Caleb didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned again with the compass. The needle spun slightly before settling. "That's wrong," he muttered. "What?" "It keeps shifting." Another crack split the air. Directly above us. Both of us flinched. A shower of pine needles drifted down from somewhere high in the canopy. But there was no movement, no animal, no falling limb, just darkness tangled in branches. Crack. Now only a second between each sound. The circle was tightening. I stepped closer to Caleb. You think it's some kind of animal? Animals don't move in geometry, he said. Crack. Above. Crack. Above. Crack. Above. The sound was no longer traveling around us. It was hovering, circling directly overhead now. My ears began to ring from the tension of listening. The forest had become completely silent otherwise. No wind, no birds, no insects. The entire ecosystem felt paused. Waiting. Caleb suddenly crouched and grabbed a stick from the forest floor. What are you doing? He stood and hurled it straight up through the branches. The stick vanished into the canopy. For a moment nothing happened. Then, crack, the snapping resumed. But not above us. Behind us again. Then left. Then ahead. Then right. The circle had expanded again. Wider. Much wider. Caleb stared upward in confusion. That shouldn't have reset it. What do you mean reset it? He looked pale. Whatever it is, it reacted. The snapping continued its precise orbit above the trees. Crack, crack, crack. Perfect intervals. Perfect spacing. Like something unseen was measuring the forest. Or measuring us. I slowly turned, scanning the trees around the clearing we now stood in. That was when I noticed something. The trees themselves. They weren't random. They formed a rough circle around us. Massive trunks spaced almost evenly apart. I walked to one and ran my hand along the bark. Cold. Ancient. Then I stepped to the next. Same spacing. Same distance. Caleb followed my gaze. Oh no, he whispered. What? This isn't the forest. Another crack echoed above. Directly over the center of the circle. Caleb looked down at the ground. Then around the trunks again. They're markers. For what? His voice dropped to a whisper. A boundary. The snapping overhead suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before. We both looked up. Nothing moved in the canopy. Then the branches began to bend. Not from wind, from weight. Something enormous shifted high above us, hidden within the dense needles. But it didn't move in a straight line. Curved. Gliding through the branches in a smooth, perfect arc. Following the same circle as before. The snapping resumed. But slower now. Deliberate. Crack. Across the circle. Crack. Across again. Watching. Studying. Caleb's voice trembled. I think it's mapping the perimeter. A deep creaking sound echoed through the forest. Not from the canopy. From the trees around us. I felt the ground shift slightly beneath my boots. At first I thought it was imagination. Then the trunks moved. Not swaying. Sliding. Slowly. Inward. The perfect circle of trees began tightening around us. Above, the unseen thing continued its patient orbit. Crack, crack, crack. I looked at Caleb. If the trees are moving, he finished the thought in a hollow whisper. Then the circle isn't measuring us. The snapping passed overhead again. Closer, much closer. And somewhere deep in the forest, far beyond the shrinking ring of trunks, I heard another circle begin.